After the funeral, my widowed ex-wife knocked on my door at exactly 12 a.m., and I stood there frozen, my hand on the knob, not sure if opening it would be the wisest thing I'd ever done or the most dangerous. She had buried her husband that afternoon. I had watched the procession pass from my window like a stranger, because that's what I was now, a stranger. The man she had once promised forever to, then walked away from, without looking back. We had been divorced for 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of rebuilding everything she dismantled when she left. And now here she was, a widow, standing on my porch in the dead of night, in the cold, with nothing but grief on her face and her fist still raised from the knock. But here is what shook me to my core. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't falling apart the way people fall apart after a funeral. She was standing straight, jaw set, eyes steady, and she was looking at me like I was the only person on earth who could answer a question she didn't yet know how to ask. My ex-wife, widowed, at my door, at midnight. What had 6 years of silence left unsaid between us? What could she possibly need from the man she once chose to leave? And why, out of every door she could have knocked on, did she come to mine? I opened it, not because I was ready, not because 6 years of hurt had somehow dissolved in the 30 seconds I stood there staring at her. I opened it because she was a human being, standing alone in the cold the night she buried her husband, and whatever she had done to me, I wasn't built to leave someone standing in the dark. She stepped inside without a word. She didn't thank me. She didn't explain herself. She just walked past me into my living room and stood in the middle of it like she was trying to remember how to breathe inside 4 walls that didn't belong to her. I closed the door behind her, and the silence between us was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. I hadn't heard her voice in 6 years. I hadn't been in the same room with her since the morning she signed the papers, picked up her single bag by the door, and left without turning around. But now she turned around. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said 4 words I never, in 6 years of imagining this moment, expected to hear. I need to confess. I need to confess. 4 words. That's all she said. But the way she said them, quiet, deliberate, like she had been carrying them in her chest for years, and they had finally gotten too heavy, made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just looked at her, standing in the middle of my living room, in her funeral clothes, hands clasped in front of her like a woman about to face a judge, and I waited. She exhaled slowly. Then she sat down on the edge of my couch, not leaning back, not making herself comfortable, sitting the way people sit when they don't believe they deserve comfort. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, she said. I felt those words land somewhere deep and painful, because for 6 years, that was exactly what I had told myself, that she stopped, that I wasn't enough. That love simply ran out the way water runs out of a cracked cup, slowly, then, all at once. But she was shaking her head before I could even process it. 3 months before I left, she said, I went to the doctor alone. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell anyone. She paused, pressed her lips together. They told me I couldn't have children. Not ever. Something was wrong that couldn't be fixed. The room went so quiet, I could hear the clock on my wall ticking. You wanted children more than anything in this world, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You talked about it on our first date. You talked about it on our wedding day. You had names picked out before we even had a house. She looked up at me, and for the first time that night, I saw at the crack in the composure she had been holding together all evening. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't watch you stay out of loyalty and spend the rest of your life grieving something I couldn't give you. So I made the decision for both of us. She stopped, swallowed hard. I told you I didn't love you anymore, because I knew you'd fight for me if I told you the truth, and I couldn't let you fight for a future I'd already taken off the table. I sat down, not on the chair across from her, right there on the other end of the couch, because my legs had simply stopped working the way legs are supposed to work. 6 years. 6 years I had believed I was not enough. 6 years I had replayed every argument, every silence, every small failure, searching for the moment I lost her. 6 years of carrying a wound I didn't even know had a different name. But here is what destroyed me in that moment, not the confession itself. It was the realization that she had carried it longer than I had. She had carried it alone, through a second marriage, through building an entirely different life, and it had never left her. You could see it in the way she sat, in the way she had walked through my door, in the way she had watched his coffin lowered into the ground that afternoon, knowing that the secret she protected me with had quietly hollowed her out from the inside. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was angry. She had taken my choice away. She had decided for me what I could and couldn't handle. And 6 years of my life had been shaped by a decision I never got to make. But I looked at her face, really looked at it, and I saw something that anger couldn't survive. I saw a woman who had loved me enough to destroy herself quietly rather than destroy me loudly. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what you were supposed to do with something like that. So I did the only thing that felt honest. I said, "Why tonight? Why after all this time?" She looked at me, eyes glassy but steady, and said, "Because he's gone." And I realized tonight that I have spent 6 years being silent about the wrong things, and I don't have enough life left to keep doing that. I have spent 6 years being silent about the wrong things, and I don't have enough life left to keep doing that. Her words sat in the air between us like smoke after a fire, not disappearing, just slowly, quietly, settling. I stood up, not out of anger, not out of shock. I stood up because I needed to move, because something inside me was shifting in a way that my body couldn't contain sitting still. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty street, the same street I had watched her husband's funeral procession move through just hours ago. The same street I had stood behind glass and told myself I felt nothing. I had lied to myself for 6 years too. The difference between us was that her lie protected me. Mine only protected my pride. I turned around and looked at her, this woman I had once known better than I knew myself. The woman who used to steal the blanket every single night and apologize every single morning. The woman who burned toast without fail and laughed about it every time like it was the first time. The woman I had buried somewhere under 6 years of carefully constructed indifference because it hurt too much to remember her as anything other than someone who left. But she hadn't just left. She had sacrificed herself quietly and walked away bleeding and never once let me see the wound. "You should have told me," I said. My voice came out low, not hard, just honest. "I know," she said. "I would have stayed. I know that too." She closed her eyes briefly. "That's why I didn't tell you." And there it was. The whole tragedy of it, wrapped in one small exchange. Two people who loved each other completely destroyed not by hatred, not by betrayal in the way the world usually means it, but by one person loving the other so fiercely that she made the worst possible decision for the best possible reason. I came back and sat down. Closer this time, not romantic. The way you sit next to someone when the space between you has finally stopped, meaning something that needs to be protected. "Did he know?" I asked. "Your husband." She nodded slowly. "He knew everything, from the beginning. He said he loved me anyway." Her voice softened at that genuine, real. "He was a good man. He deserved better than to die at 61. I'm sorry you lost him." She looked at me sharply, like she was checking if I meant it. I did. Whatever complicated thing lived between her and me, her grief was real. Her loss was real. And I was not so small a man that I couldn't hold space for that. Something in her face changed when she saw that I meant it. Something released, like a fist that had been clenched for so long it had forgotten how to open. "I'm sorry I took your choice away," she said quietly. "I have never stopped being sorry for that. Not for one day." I thought about everything I could say in that moment. I thought about the years, the silence, the long Sunday mornings I spent learning how to be alone again. The version of myself I had to rebuild from scratch, quieter, more careful, more guarded than the man she had married. But I also thought about who I had become, and I realized, sitting there in the stillness of that midnight hour, that I was not broken. I was different, and different wasn't the same thing as destroyed. "I forgive you," I said. Not quickly, not easily, I said it the way you say something that costs you slowly, with full understanding of what you're releasing and what you're choosing to put down. Her breath caught, just slightly. Her chin trembled once before she controlled it. You don't have to say that, she whispered. I know, I said. That's why it means something. She pressed her hand over her mouth, held it there. And for the first time since she had knocked on my door at midnight, for the first time since she had walked into my living room and stood in the middle of it like a woman bracing for a verdict, she let herself cry. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, the way people cry when the thing they've been holding finally gets set down somewhere safe. I didn't touch her. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat beside her and let her feel it, because that was what she had come here for. Not romance, not a second chance, not to rewrite the past. She had come here to hand me the truth she had carried alone for 6 years, and to finally put it down. After a while, the crying slowed. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and exhaled the long, shaky exhale of someone surfacing from deep water. What do we do now? She asked. It was a real question. I could hear that, not loaded with expectation. Just honest, the question of two people standing at the end of a very long road, looking at each other, without the weight of old stories between them, for the first time. Now, I said, you go home and rest. You buried your husband today. That's enough for one night. She almost smiled. And tomorrow? I thought about it, genuinely thought about it. Tomorrow, I said, maybe we start over. Not as what we were, just as two people who finally know the truth about each other. I paused. I think we skipped that part the first time. She looked at me for a long moment, and in that look was everything. Gratitude, grief, relief, and the fragile, terrifying beginning of something that had no name yet and didn't need one. She stood up, smoothed her dress, picked up her purse from where she had set it, on my floor. At the door, she stopped and turned back to me one last time. I'm glad you opened the door, she said. So am I told her. And I meant it not because of what it had given me, but because of what it had given us both. The one thing that 6 years of silence had quietly stolen from us without either of us realizing it. The truth, clean and whole and finally free. She walked out into the night. I stood at my door and watched her go, and for the first time in 6 years, watching her leave didn't feel like losing something. It felt like setting something down gently, with both hands, with intention. I closed the door softly, walked back to my living room, and sat down in the quiet. And somewhere in that silence, in that still, midnight house that had just held more honesty than it had seen in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the peace of a man who had gotten everything he wanted, the deeper kind. The peace of a man who had finally let go of the story he'd been telling himself and found that the truth, as painful as it was something he could actually live with. Some doors we open out of obligation, some we open out of curiosity, and some, just some, we open because something in us already knows that whatever is standing on the other side is exactly what we needed to face. My widowed ex-wife knocked on my door at midnight, and when I opened it, I wasn't just letting her in. I was finally, after 6 long years, letting myself out. Before you go, I want to ask you something personal. Have you ever held on to a version of events that turned out to be incomplete? Have you ever forgiven someone not because they deserved it, but because you deserved the peace? Tell me in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this story moved you even slightly, subscribe and tap the bell, because every week we bring you stories that remind you what it means to be human.